I wanted to say a few words today about an exhibition that we have prepared that is essentially work that, for the most part, will be familiar to you because it is work from our permanent collection that's been seen downstairs in our Art of the 20th Century gallery, and that is here temporarily while those galleries are renovated. So we're very excited about that change downstairs and looking forward to presenting them in a new light very soon. But we were keen, of course, not to have all of this work, and among the modern collection are some of the sort of favorite paintings of the visitors to the museum. We wanted to find a way to present this while the gallery was being renovated, and so we devised, I say we, John Marchiari and myself, devised this thematic installation of still life subjects as a way to present this, this modern collection. And I should say also that it was a way for us to develop one of the sort of what had been our guiding idea when we first installed the modern collection when I first arrived here a couple of years ago, or reinstalled, I should say, which was to present the international scope of art in the 20th century and really convey the way in which divisions of American, European, become a little bit hard to, or sort of artificial, let's say, to maintain in a period where travel becomes very much easier. We find Americans going to study at the academies of Paris and returning, some of them, with friends, colleagues who exhibit in the United States. The sort of confluence of ideas becomes very, very much central to, I think, what 20th century modernism is. And the virtue of presenting this still life theme was that it really allowed us, it was a great kind of catch-all, and it also, but it also sort of illustrates the changing nature of kind of modern art, how it differs from the art, let's say, of the sort of the 19th century and of the Academy, which rated the still life subject rather low, so that in this in a 19th century sort of system, whether we're thinking of the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris or the academies founded in the United States, there's a very sort of hierarchical conception of the various subjects that could be treated by the artist, ranking usually first and highest historical subjects, religious paintings. By historical, I mean very often, well, in the grand tradition, classical subjects, but increasingly historical subjects from contemporary life, and then sort of below that came the tradition of portrait painting, let's say, landscape, insofar as it comes to be its own independent genre, and then sort of still life might have been somewhere around what was just called genre painting, meaning painting of sort of everyday, prosaic subjects that could be anecdotal scenes of village life or the village sort of inn or the kitchen, where the still life subjects are are arranged. Am I doing this? Is it? No, that's all right. I wasn't sure if it was my phone. So this is a very long-standing tradition. It's to say that since the sort of origins of the still life subject, it has occupied this kind of uncertain status. And its origins, I should say also, are actually very well illustrated in our collection, so that we have, notably in a gallery adjacent, our very remarkable still life by Sanchez, which is in some ways regarded as the kind of first still life of its kind, dating around 1600, where a Spanish artist here is presenting a subject, perhaps with an allegorical conception behind it, as is sort of the still life arrangement in sort of very what seemed to us, I think, very sort of modernist and inspired formal terms becomes the subject exclusive of any figures and any further sort of narrative or context. this is developed particularly by painters in the sort of northern tradition. We think of Dutch still life painting becoming really a staple of an international sort of market for small domestic-sized paintings in the 17th century. And then with an afterlife that we see here in the mostly early, although early and mid 20th century. And so I want to sort of talk about the variety, let's say, of still lifes that we see presented in these galleries to make a point that is a point that is made when we show our art of the 20th century fully, which is that the old ideas of sort of classics versus the moderns, which might have been sort of the way in which artists and their styles were sort of categorized in the 19th century, don't really hold so well in the 20th, where we begin to see a sort of a real variety of competing and related styles that, if anything, becomes the kind of defining feature of art in the modern period. Is this multiplicity, whereby sort of old isms don't really apply. There are certain overarching sort of themes that can still be, if we want to, we speak, for instance, in the gallery installation as it was organized downstairs, of a kind of a more figurative tradition and then a more abstract one, and the way in which this is kind of a round about 1912, this is sort of fork in the road, where artists are sort of have to declare, if you will, their allegiance to the subject or to more formal explorations. And I think, though, that one of the things that comes across when you look at this selection is that no such choice need necessarily be made, that it is possible, using a sort of traditional representative subject, and in the case of the still life, we think typically of foodstuffs and sort of, again, kind of domestic objects arranged in what is usually an indoor setting, but need not be. Again, we see the sort of the full range of this here, and I wanted to be as inclusive as possible in the way that the still life was kind of presented and defined here, so that it can be everything from the still life subject. You know, interestingly enough, I mean, for all the sort of avant-garde experimentation that we see coming out of Paris, and particularly the studios of Picasso and Braque around the 19-teens, inventing as they do Cubism, their use of and choice of subjects remain actually very conventional. And in some sense, it is the more sort of prosaic and commonplace the subject, the better it seems to suit their real focus, which is an investigation of form and representation. And so we find Braque, for instance, here, working with a still life, tabletop assemblage of fruit, what appears to be sort of glass, and just the sort of most, the very same elements that we might have found in the 17th century Dutch still life, or indeed in the Spanish tradition, being presented, though, viewed through this sort of abstracting and modernist lens. The same is true of other works where the still life subject has been so sort of manipulated and transformed that it becomes, in fact, hard to recognize as a still life at all. And I think, for instance, of Morgan Russell's still life here with the so-called synchrony with nude and yellow actually refers to a bust. Again, it's a kind of tabletop arrangement with the bust of a figure. So we imagine this to be a plaster bust of the kind that was used in the academy. Again, this is sort of the crux of the academic tradition, was work from either life or the antique. And the antique very often was represented by plaster casts after Roman or Greek busts. And so we find Russell here, even as he's developing, and this is right contemporary with the manifesto that he and his American colleague have drafted in Paris. They are contemporaries of Picasso and Braque, and they're in Picasso and Braque's invention of Cubism. And Russell, in response really to the sort of orphism of Robert Delaunay, whose work is his work is included right here, is kind of they're devising their own ism, if you will, and it too is predicated on ideas about color, contrast, and a kind of a willingness to toe the line of an all-over abstraction without sort of without losing fully without losing hold completely of the subject, so that the shuttlecock, for example, the badminton shuttlecock, remains recognizable once one's eyes adjust to the kind of to the chromatic effects that are the real subject of the painting, and we see this we see these kinds of I think in most every case, the sort of the way in which the still life subject can become a kind of pretext for whatever it is that most preoccupies the artist in their practice. So that when it's painted by Matisse around the time of the First World War, we can see in this a willingness, a sort of a will to escape the sort of the chaos and horror of contemporary political circumstances, and sort of a retreat into the kind of engagement with what sort of natural subject, and a sort of return to nature, albeit nature sort of as it is the presentation of the bouquet, this sort of where the hand of man, of course, is very strongly felt, and with its sort of connotations of mortality, and we think again of the still life subject in the case of the floral still life in the northern tradition, with a sort of recalling vanity and sort of reminder, a memento mori, a reminder of death, in that the flowers, like man, will wilt and die, and this can become grist for the more, I would say, surrealist or symbolist experiments also of an artist like Rivera, or indeed Thomas Hart Benton. These are, they make a nice pair, I think, these two pictures. And again, it sort of speaks to the broad sense in which I understood the still life when I prepared this installation, that a portrait, strictly speaking, like Rivera's of Dr. Clarence Moore, could nevertheless have, this speaks to sort of to Rivera's quite ingenious take on the portrait, which becomes a sort of a portrait, not of course a likeness, or as a likeness of the artist, I should say the artist, of the doctor's hands, but it becomes a sort of a symbolic portrait insofar as an allegory is being presented here of, and as Rivera would have us understand, the tree of life being trimmed here by the hands of the good doctor. And in a work like Benton's, very sort of, in some sense, kind of figurative and prosaic representation of this kind of, it always, maybe it's because of the sort of the associations one makes with this sort of this type of regionalism. It puts me in mind of a kind of Midwestern subject, the plain, the horses, and the presence once again of the skull, recalling this sort of one of the staples of the tradition of the still life as a sort of memento mori, reminder of man's own transience, let's say. And I want to just sort of, I'm going to conclude with one of the later, and in some ways what I think is the more unusual works, or one that stands out in this group, and that is Wayne Tebow's Caged Pie here of 1962. You can come a little closer if you like. And it's interesting to me in particular because it happens to be contemporaneous with Stuart Davis's Terrace here of the very same year. We see Davis continuing a tradition which is essentially that of European cubism that he has developed in a sort of in a very decorative vein in this, what the title leads us to understand is a sort of terrace tabletop view. While Tebow, with a sort of a wink and a postmodern sense of humor, I think, makes the still life his own too. It is one of, let's say, Tebow's two principal subjects. He's a painter of the Bay Area, best known for scenes of sort of suburban highways and byways, or these frankly very attractive, very sensual. I always think of the application of the paint being a little bit like icing here in these works by Tebow, but taking on of the very commonplace and familiar subjects, so that the pie, as I said, or the presentation of game or foodstuffs is a long-standing one in the landscape, rather in the still life tradition, but is made by Tebow into something sort of that recalls a certain kind of mass production and sort of mechanization of the sort of the truck stop diner with its pie or its donuts and candies that have become something at once sort of commercial and mass produced, and sort of lovingly rendered with all of the kind of sensual, as I was saying, sort of impasto of the old master. I hope that this gives some sense of the sort of a range of material that I was very keen to bring together, and that I think I can say also, to my mind at least, creates an interesting opportunity for us to see work that we've seen before and are accustomed to in new contexts, alongside new neighbors, and hopefully sort of appreciated in a new light. So I thank you all very much for joining me.